General Hospital spoilers suggest that Michael Corinthos may know who shot Drew Cain. Tracy Quartermaine promised Michael that she would keep it a secret that she saw him at Drew's house just before he was shot. That could imply that Michael is responsible for shooting Drew, but there is most likely more to the story. It is possible that Michael witnessed the perpetrator shoot Drew and is keeping quiet about it. Michael would undoubtedly want to protect someone, and he would go to great lengths to conceal the crime. Michael Corinthos may have been on his way to confront Drew Cain. He might have wanted to confirm Drew's reunion with Willow Tate and encourage him to let her go. Although Willow is not in her right mind right now, he understands that Drew is toxic to her. Before he could go inside, he noticed a blast from inside the house, as well as a second blast from his car. Although it was dark outside, he couldn't see the shooter from his car, but he did notice someone leaving Drew's house. Michael Corinthos may know who Drew Cain's shooter is. Michael could have been taken aback to see his cousin, Danny Morgan, fleeing the scene of the crime with a gun in hand. Michael would have been too stunned to move, and unable to comprehend that Danny had shot Drew. Michael wouldn't have time to react quickly enough to catch Danny, who had fled. Tracy arrived at Drew's house just as Michael was leaving it. Michael would need to ensure that Danny was not implicated in the crime. Danny Morgan has a great reason for shooting Drew Cain. Danny used to think of Drew as a father, especially when Drew thought he was Jason Morgan. Furthermore, even after it was revealed that he was Jason's twin brother, he and Drew remained close. Drew would have done anything for Danny. Drew's decision to turn on Danny would be extremely hurtful, and the fact that he is keeping his sister, Scout Quartermaine, from him was the final straw. Drew also attempted to arrest Danny for taking Scout from camp, which added fuel to the fire. Danny believed that getting rid of Drew was the only way to save his sister and keep them together. Michael Corinthos must make sure the truth is out. Michael will go to any length to ensure that no one knows Danny is Drew's shooter. He would begin to leave tracks to ensure that the crime was covered up. He can explain to Tracy why he was at Drew's right before he was shot, as Tracy may believe Michael is responsible. Michael wouldn't even want to tell Tracy the truth about Danny's actions because he believes that knowing would put Danny in danger. What do you think? What are your thoughts? Do you think Michael knows who shot Drew? Was Danny the one who shot Drew? Will Michael ensure that the truth about Danny never gets out? Keep watching General Hospital, which airs on ABC weekdays, to find out what happens next. Don't forget to check back here on a regular basis for the most up-to-date General Hospital information, news, and spoilers. General Hospital spoilers suggest that as everyone in the PCPD scrambles to figure out who shot Drew Cain, Michael Corinthos may have witnessed everything when the gun was fired. Will he keep quiet about the entire situation, depending on who pulled the trigger? Was Michael Corinthos at the crime scene? Given the circumstances, Michael could easily decide to go to Drew's house and confront him again. Having said that, something may have prevented him from entering the premises. Michael, like Trina Robinson and Kai Taylor, may have fled the scene to avoid being implicated in what he witnessed. He may have even fled the scene because he did not want to tell the police what he saw. A father protects his children. General Hospital spoilers for Wednesday, September 3rd reveal that Michael returned to the Quartermaine mansion soaked. When he got home, he noticed Brooklyn Quartermaine talking to Wiley Corinthos because the little boy couldn't sleep. Michael seemed determined to keep Willow Tate away from Wiley and Amelia Corinthos. However, does he have any additional concerns as a result of something he witnessed that night? Michael has a bad history with Drew, so he may keep quiet if he sees someone like Alexis Davis or Curtis Ashford pull the trigger. But what about the mother of his children? He'd be torn. He wouldn't want to report her, but he also wouldn't want her around the kids while she continued to make poor decisions. Having said that, there is speculation that Colette Moreau was to blame. If Colette was wearing a mask, would Michael believe Willow was pulling the trigger even though she wasn't? Did Michael witness Drew's shooting? Share your thoughts. Tune into the ABC soap every day and visit this website frequently for the most recent General Hospital updates, spoilers, and news. The air was heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and the faint metallic tang of blood. Michael crouched behind the rusted dumpster, his breath short and his heart pounding in his chest like a drumbeat echoing through the deserted alley. He hadn't intended to be here, or to see what he saw, but it was now burned into his mind, a scene he couldn't erase no matter how hard he squeezed his eyes shut. Drew was dead. Michael knew at the moment the gunshot pierced the darkness, sharp and final, like the snap of a bone. He'd seen Drew's body crumple, the life draining out of him as he hit the pavement, his eyes wide with shock, his hands clutching at the air as if he could catch the second slipping away. Michael had also seen the shooter, a fleeting glimpse, a shadow moving quickly, but enough to identify who it was. Enough to feel the weight of that knowledge as a stone in his gut. It was supposed to be a quick stop at the corner store for a pack of cigarettes and a soda. Michael hadn't wanted to go, but Drew insisted, flashing him that lopsided grin that always made it difficult to refuse. They had been friends since they were children, growing up in the same dilapidated apartment complex, sharing scraped knees and stolen sips of cheap beer from cans left behind by their parents. Drew was the reckless one, always chasing trouble like it was a game, while Michael trailed behind as the cautious shadow, always ready to pull him back from the brink. But tonight, there was no turning back. Tonight, the Edge had discovered them. The alley was a shortcut they'd used 100 times before, cutting through the maze of brick buildings and flickering streetlights to save a few minutes on the walk. It was too quiet, the kind of silence that made the hairs on Michael's back stand up. Drew had not noticed, and even if he had, he didn't care. He was halfway through telling a story about a girl he met at the bar, his voice loud and careless, when the figure appeared out of the shadows. Michael noticed the gun first, a glint in the dim light of a street lamp, and his stomach dropped. He grabbed Drew's arm and attempted to pull him back, but it was too late. The shot rang out, deafening in the narrow alley, and Drew staggered, his story cut off in mid-sentence. Michael dove behind the dumpster, his knees scraping the pavement and his hands trembling as he pressed against the cold metal. He did not scream, move, or breathe. Drew fell, and he could only watch helplessly. The shooter did not linger. Michael caught a glimpse of their faces as they turned to run, the hood of their jacket slipping just enough to reveal features he was all too familiar with. It wasn't a stranger, nor a faceless thug from a rival crew. Michael's mind reeled, attempting to make sense of it and put the pieces together, but the shock was too thick, like fog clouding his thoughts. He remained frozen there until the sound of footsteps faded and the alley fell silent again, except for the soft drip of water from a leaking pipe. When he finally moved, his legs felt like someone else's. He crawled to Drew's side, hands hovering over the body, afraid to touch or confirm what he already knew. Drew's eyes remained fixed on the sky, and the blood pooling beneath him was dark and slick, spreading like ink across the pavement. Michael whispered his name, a reflex and a plea, but there was no response. He reached for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly that he almost dropped it, and dialed 911. His voice cracked as he spoke, stumbling over his words while giving the operator the address. He didn't mention the shooter or describe what he had seen. The words were lodged in his throat, but they would not come out. Not yet. The police arrived quickly, their sirens blaring through the night, and red and blue lights painted the alley in stark, unnatural colors. Michael stood back, his hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground as the officers swarmed the area. They questioned him about what he saw and heard, as well as whether anyone else was present. He replied in fragments, his voice flat, his mind elsewhere. He explained that he had been walking with Drew when they were jumped, and that everything happened so quickly. He didn't tell them about the shooter's face, or how the recognition burned like acid in his chest. He didn't trust himself to say it aloud, especially since he wasn't sure what it meant. They took Drew's body and placed it in a black bag as if it were just another piece of evidence. Michael watched from the alley's edge, his breath fogging in the cold air and his mind replaying the shot moment by moment. He could still see the shooter's eyes, which had locked on Drew with a cold, deliberate focus. It was not arbitrary. It wasn't a botched robbery or a stray bullet from a gang dispute. It was personal, and Michael understood why. He simply didn't want to admit it. The days that followed were blurred. Michael remained in his apartment, the curtains drawn and the TV on in the background to drown out the silence. He didn't answer his phone or open the door when neighbors knocked, their voices soft and concerned. He kept seeing Drew's face, hearing his laugh, and remembering how he'd always been present, a constant in a life that had never been easy. And he kept seeing the shooter, their face vivid in his mind, a name he couldn't bring himself to say. He understood what would happen if he spoke. This was not a neighborhood where you went to the cops if you wanted to stay alive. Snitches did not last long, and Michael had seen enough to understand how they worked. But it wasn't all about snitching. This was about betrayal, and the wound was deeper than any bullet. He tried to piece it together at night, lying awake and staring at the ceiling as the hours passed. Drew had gotten mixed up in things, debts, deals, and favors owed to the wrong people. Michael had warned him to stay out of it, but Drew always laughed it off and said he could handle it. Michael believed him, or at least wanted to. But now that Drew was gone, the truth could not be ignored. The shooter was no stranger. Drew had trusted them, and they were familiar with his habits, routes, and weaknesses. Michael had also been there, unintentionally serving as a witness and tying up loose ends. He considered running. Packing a bag, boarding a bus out of town, and disappearing before anyone realized what he knew. But where will he go? This city was all he'd ever known, its streets imprinted on his bones, its rhythms as familiar as his own. And running would not bring Drew back, would not wash away the guilt he felt for not doing more, for not stopping it somehow. He considered going to the police and telling them everything, but the idea made his stomach twist. He'd seen what happened to those who spoke out, families threatened, homes burned, bodies discovered in places no one looked. Nonetheless, the weight of his silence was crushing him, pressing down until he could hardly breathe. A week after the shooting, he received a knock on the door. Michael froze, his pulse racing and his hand reaching for the baseball bat he kept beside the couch. The knock returned, soft but insistent, and a voice called his name. It was too familiar, and it sent shivers down his spine. He didn't respond or move, but the voice continued to speak, low and urgent, as if they simply wanted to talk and knew he was present. Michael tightened his grip on the bat as his mind raced. Was that it? Had they come to finish what they started? He backed away from the door, his gaze drawn to the window, calculating the drop to the street beneath. However, the knocking stopped and the voice faded, and when he finally worked up the courage to look through the peephole, the hallway was empty. Sleep did not come that night or the next. Michael kept the lights turned off and moved around his apartment like a ghost, checking the locks and listening for footsteps. He stopped going out, answering his phone, and doing anything that could attract attention. But he couldn't stop thinking about Drew, the shooter, and the decision he needed to make. He could remain silent, lower his head, and hope they would leave him alone. Or he could speak up, risk everything, and possibly deliver Drew the justice he deserved. The thought of it made his chest ache, a combination of fear, anger, and grief with no outlet. He began writing down everything he remembered, including the angle of the streetlight, the sound of the shot, and the way the shooters had dropped back just enough to reveal their face. He wrote it in a notebook hidden under his mattress, the words spilling out like an unfinished confession. It was the only way he could make sense of it, and the only way to keep the memory from fading or becoming something else. He didn't know if he'd ever show it to anyone, or if he'd have the courage to act on it, but writing it felt like a step forward, a small rebellion against the fear that gripped him. The neighborhood felt quieter now, as if it was holding its breath. People did not talk about Drew openly, but Michael could see it in their eyes, questions, suspicions, and unspoken warnings. He overheard whispers about who could have done it, names thrown around like dice, none of them correct. He wanted to scream the truth, to tell them they were mistaken, that he knew and had seen. But he did not. He kept his mouth shut, his head lowered, and the notebook hidden. Weeks passed into months, and the weight did not lift. Michael found work at a warehouse, which kept him busy and took his mind away from the alley, the shooter, and his notebook. But it was always there, waiting for him when he closed his eyes, a shadow that followed him around. He began drinking more cheap whiskey, which burned his throat and dulled the edges of his mind. It didn't really help, but it was something to do to pass the time. He avoided the alley and went the long way to the store, but the city felt smaller now, as if it was closing in on him, knowing his secret and waiting for him to reveal it. One night, he saw the shooter again. Not in person, not in flesh, but on a grainy security camera photo plastered on a newsstand, as part of a story about another shooting, another body in another alley. The face was unmistakable, even when blurred or partially hidden. Michael's hands shook as he purchased the newspaper, his eyes scanning the article and his mind racing. The police had been looking for them for weeks, but they didn't have a name or what Michael had. He stood there with the paper crumpled in his fist, and for the first time, he felt something shift inside him, something other than fear or grief. It was anger, raw and sharp, cutting through the mist. He returned home, took the notebook from under the mattress, and went over it again, word for word, detail by detail. He reflected on Drew, their shared life, and the promises they'd made to look out for each other. He thought about the shooter, the coldness in their eyes, and how easily they'd pulled the trigger. And he thought about himself, about the man he wanted to be, rather than the one who hid, remained silent, and allowed fear to win. He tore a page from the notebook and wrote a new one, this time including a name, address, and description. He sealed it in an envelope with no return address and deposited it in a mailbox outside the police station at night. Michael wasn't sure what would happen next. Maybe they'd find the shooter, maybe not. They might come for him, or they might leave him alone. But as he walked back to his apartment, the city seemed lighter, as if it had exhaled. He didn't feel safe, exactly, but he did feel something different, something he hadn't felt since that night in the alley. He felt like he'd accomplished something, like he'd taken a stand, like he'd given Drew's death new meaning. And that was enough for now. The atmosphere in Port Charles had become more intense than usual, with tension simmering beneath every whispered conversation and stolen glance. Michael Corinthos became restless, pacing the dimly lit hallway outside the Metro Court conference room, his phone clutched tightly but forgotten. He couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was about to occur, something that would change everything for him, his family, and possibly the entire Corinthos empire. It wasn't paranoia this time. It was instinct, and Michael had long since learned to trust it. Earlier that evening, he overheard Drew and Valentine's conversation in one of the Metro Court's secluded lounges. Their voices were low, urgent, and full of tension. Drew had been pushing harder than ever recently, his vendetta against certain key players becoming increasingly dangerous by the day. Michael wasn't sure who Drew was targeting right now, but he had no doubt that his adoptive uncle was playing a high-stakes game. And by the sounds of it, Drew was in far more trouble than anyone realized. Michael had tried to walk away, telling himself it wasn't his problem, but he couldn't shake the gnawing unease in his gut. So, instead of returning home to Willow and the kids as promised, he found himself following Drew from a safe distance, blending into the shadows of the Metro Court parking structure. That's when he noticed it, Drew striding quickly across the lot, shoulders tense, head swiveling slightly as if he was being followed. Michael slowed his pace, staying just far enough back to avoid detection, his heart pounding in his chest. A black SUV was parked in the far corner, its windows tinted and the engine idling quietly. Something about the setup screamed trouble, but before Michael could process what was going on, it played out in front of him like a nightmare in slow motion. A figure emerged from behind the SUV, moving with deliberate precision, and the distinctive glint of metal caught the faint glow of the overhead light. Michael's breath caught in his throat. There was no time to react or intervene before the sharp crack of gunfire broke the silence of the night. Drew staggered, shock on his face as he clutched his side, blood seeping through his fingers. Michael froze, pressed against the cold concrete wall, his body screaming for him to move, to do anything. But the shooter did not hesitate. Another shot rang out, knocking Drew to the ground. The sound echoed throughout the parking garage, but it was as if the entire world had stopped in Michael's ears. He struggled to breathe, his entire body frozen in place as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The shooter crouched over Drew for a moment, rifling through his pockets with chilling efficiency, before disappearing back into the SUV, tires screeching as it sped away into the night. Michael's instinct was to rush to Drew, but something stopped him, not fear for himself, but the creeping realization that whoever orchestrated this might still be watching and waiting. He pressed himself deeper into the shadows, forcing his breath out in slow, measured bursts until he was certain the danger had passed. Finally, he moved, his sneakers squeaking softly on the concrete as he dashed to Drew's side. Drew was conscious, but fading quickly, his breathing shallow and ragged. Michael dropped to his knees and pressed his hands over the wound, desperate to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me," he said softly, his voice cracking. "Don't you dare check out on me now." Drew's eyelids fluttered, his gaze barely focused, but he managed to rasp out something unintelligible, perhaps a name or a warning. Michael leaned in closer, but before he could process it, Drew's eyes rolled back and his body went limp. Panic gripped Michael's chest as he fumbled for his phone, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. He forced himself to remain calm, providing the dispatcher with as accurate information as he could about their location and Drew's condition. Every second felt like an eternity, with sirens in the distance taking far too long to arrive. When the paramedics arrived, Michael stumbled back and let them work while scanning the shadows of the parking structure, convinced that someone was still watching. His mind raced with possibilities. Was this connected to Pikeman? To whom? Valentine. To someone else entirely. Or was this something more personal, something hidden deep in Drew's past that had finally caught up with him? As the EMTs loaded Drew onto the stretcher, Michael made a snap decision. He wasn't about to tell anyone what he'd seen just yet. Not even Sonny. Not even Willow. Not until he realized what he was dealing with. He got into his car, gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, and drove away without looking back. However, his thoughts would not stop spinning. If he had seen the shooter's face, and he was pretty sure he had, even if only for a split second, whoever was responsible for this might have realized they had a loose end to tie up. And Michael Corinthos had no illusions about what these people were capable of. Later that night, standing alone in the nursery, watching his children sleep soundly, Michael felt the weight of his decision bear down on him. He wanted to tell Willow everything, to relieve himself, but he couldn't. Not yet. If Drew survived, and he had to believe he would, they'd get answers soon. But if Drew didn't make it, Michael knew he'd have to carry this secret alone, which could destroy everything he'd worked so hard to protect. Over the next few days, as news of Drew's shooting spread like wildfire throughout Port Charles, Michael kept his head down, pretending to be as shocked as everyone else. Sonny was furious, barking orders at his men and demanding answers. Carly was frantic, dividing her time between the hospital and her phone, attempting to piece together what had happened. Jason had gone silent, his icy calm masking the impending storm beneath the surface. Throughout it all, Michael watched and listened, carefully gathering information while ensuring no one realized how much he knew already. But the secret ate away at his sleep, appetite, and sanity. Drew's face remained pale and ghost-like under the harsh fluorescent lights in the final moments before the ambulance doors closed. One night, Michael drove back to the parking garage where it all happened, unable to bear the silence. He parked in the same location, retracing his steps slowly and methodically, as if replaying the events would reveal something he'd overlooked. He examined every shadow and corner, looking for any indication of who the shooter was or why Drew had been targeted. Then he discovered it, a single spent shell casing glinting faintly under one of the dim lights. He crouched down and turned it over in his fingers, instantly realizing it wasn't random. Whoever did this used military precision. This was not a mugging gone wrong. This was an execution. Michael pocketed the casing, his thoughts racing with possibilities. If Sonny learned of this, it would spark a war. But perhaps that was exactly what someone intended, to draw Sonny out, to destabilize everything and everyone connected to him. Drew remained unconscious in the hospital, hooked up to machines, with his fate uncertain. Carly sat by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave, while Sam tried to remain composed for Scout's sake. Jason had been in and out, quiet but determined to find out who was responsible. Then there was Michael, who had a secret that could blow the entire investigation wide open, but was terrified of what would happen if he revealed it too soon. He'd seen enough to know one thing for certain: this was not over. Whoever pulled the trigger that night was still out there, watching, waiting, and possibly plotting their next moves. The question that haunted him every time he closed his eyes was simple but chilling: had they seen him, too? Because if they had, Michael Corinthos would no longer be just a witness. He was the target. As he stood at Drew's hospital door, staring through the glass, he silently promised himself. He was going to find out who had done this. He was going to reveal every hidden motive, secret, and betrayal. And once he did, there was no going back. But for the time being, Michael remained in the shadows, as he had the night Drew was shot, waiting for the right moment to act, fully aware that time was running out. Michael's sleepless nights got worse as the days went on. Every time he closed his eyes, he was transported back to that parking garage, hearing the deafening echo of gunfire and seeing Drew's body collapse to the ground. The guilt gnawed at him, the guilt of concealing the truth, of knowing something no one else did, and of failing to intervene sooner. But deep down, Michael knew that revealing what he had seen would lead to a door he wasn't ready to walk through. Whoever orchestrated Drew's shooting wasn't done yet, and if they discovered Michael was a witness, he and his entire family could be in danger. He began to notice small, unsettling things: a dark car parked near his house late at night, unfamiliar faces around the Metro Court, and phone calls that disconnected as soon as he answered. Michael wasn't sure if he was hallucinating or if someone was actually watching him, but paranoia was setting in quickly. He didn't dare to tell Willow yet. He wanted to keep her safe from the approaching darkness. What haunted him the most, however, were Drew's half-muttered words before passing out. A single name. Michael could not forget it, and he wasn't sure who he could trust anymore. Michael awoke early the next morning, his mind clouded by fragmented images of the shooting, Drew's desperate gasps, and the single name Drew had whispered before passing out. It had been faint, almost incoherent, but Michael was certain of what he'd heard: Caden. The name didn't mean anything to him at first, but Drew's broken voice sent shivers down his spine. Michael was certain that this was not a coincidence, regardless of who Caden was. He sat in his living room, staring at his laptop, unable to shake the paranoia that grew deeper with each passing hour. He opened a private browser and began digging. After a few searches, he discovered an unsettling trail: Caden Holt, a known mercenary linked to multiple Black Ops contracts overseas, and rumored to have ties to the Pikeman Group. Michael's stomach dropped. Pikeman was already a thorn in Sonny's side, and if Drew's shooting was linked to them, there could only be one conclusion: Port Charles was on the verge of war. But the bigger question haunted him: why Drew? Michael needed answers but couldn't involve Sonny just yet. His father's rage and rash decisions would set fire to everything, and Michael suspected that this situation necessitated a quiet investigation rather than an open confrontation. That meant one thing: he needed to contact someone who could work in the shadows, just like the people he was up against. Late that night, he met Dex in a deserted area of the Quartermain estate. Dex was surprised to hear from him. Michael had been drifting away from Sonny's organization for months, but when Michael described what happened in the parking garage, Dex turned pale. "You should have told Sonny immediately," Dex hissed, scanning the area nervously as if someone was already listening. "I can't," Michael said firmly. "Not yet. If Sonny makes the wrong move, Pikeman will retaliate, and Drew may die for good this time. I need you to help me figure out who ordered this before anyone else does."